Maya Angelou, an acclaimed American poet, storyteller, activist, and autobiographer, was born in St. Louis, Missouri. Angelou had a broad career as a singer, dancer, actress, composer, and Hollywood's first female black director, but became most famous as a writer, editor, essayist, playwright, and poet. As a civil rights activist, Angelo worked for Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. She was also an educator and served as the Reynolds Professor of American Studies at Wake Forest University. She served on two presidential committees for Gerald Ford in 1975 and for Jimmy Carter in 1977. In 2000, Angelo was awarded the National Medal of Arts by President Bill Clinton. In 2010, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States, by President Barack Obama. Angelo was awarded over 50 honorary degrees before her death. Angelo's most famous work, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, deals with her early years in Long Beach, St. Louis, and Stamps, Arkansas, where she lived with her brother and paternal grandmother. In one of its most evocative moments, Angelo describes how she was first cuddled, then raped by her mother's boyfriend when she was just 7 years old. When the man was murdered by her uncles for his crime, Angelo felt responsible and stopped talking. Angelo remained mute for 5 years but developed a love for language. She read black authors like Langston Hughes, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Paul Laurence Dunbar, as well as canonical works by William Shakespeare, Charles Dickens, and Edgar Allan Poe. When Angelo was 12 and a half, Mrs. Flowers, an educated African American woman, finally got her to speak again. Mrs. Flowers, as Angelo recalled in her children's book Mrs. Flowers, A Moment of Friendship in 1986, emphasized the importance of the spoken word, explained the nature of and importance of education, and instilled in her a love of poetry. Angelo graduated at the top of her eighth grade class. Angelo attended George Washington High School in San Francisco and took lessons in dance and drama on a scholarship at the California Labor School. When Angelo, just 17, graduated from high school and gave birth to a son, Guy, she began to work as the first African American and first female streetcar conductor in San Francisco. As she explained in Singing and Swinging and Getting Merry Like Christmas, the third of her autobiographies, she also worked as a shake dancer in nightclubs, fry cook in hamburger joints, dinner cook in a Creole restaurant, and once got a job in a mechanic's shop taking the paint off cars. Angelo married a white ex-sailor, Tosh Angelos, in 1950. After they separated, Angelo continued her study of dance in New York City, returning to San Francisco to sing in the Purple Onion Cabaret and garnering the attention of talent scouts. Angelo joined the Harlem Writers Guild in the late 1950s and met James Baldwin and other important writers. It was during this time that Angelo had the opportunity to hear Martin Luther King speak. Inspired by his message, she decided to become a part of the struggle for civil rights. She was offered a position as the Northern Coordinator for Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Following her work for Dr. King, Angelo moved to Cairo with her son and in 1962 to Ghana in West Africa. She worked as a freelance writer and was a feature editor at the African Review. When Angelo returned to the United States in the mid 1960s, she was encouraged by author James Baldwin and Robert Loomis, an editor at Random House, to write an autobiography. Initially, Angelo declined the offers, but eventually changed her mind and wrote, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. The book chronicles Angelo's childhood and ends with the birth of her son. It won immediate success and was nominated for a National Book Award. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is the first of Angelo's six autobiographies. It is widely taught in schools, though it has faced controversy over its portrayal of race, sexual abuse, and violence. Angelo's use of fiction writing techniques like dialogue and plot in her autobiographies was innovative for its time and helped in part to complicate the genre's relationship with truth and memory. Though her books are episodic and are tightly crafted, the events seldom follow a strict chronology and are arranged to emphasize themes. Other volumes include Gathered Together in My Name in 1974, which begins when Angelo is 17, and A New Mother, Singing and Swinging and Getting Merry Like Christmas, an account of her tour in Europe and Africa with Porgy and Bess, The Art of a Woman in 1981, a description of Angelo's acting and writing career in New York, and a work for the civil rights movement. And All God's Children Need Traveling Shoes in 1986, which recounts Angelo's travels in West Africa and her decision to return without her son to America. It took Angelo 15 years to write the final volume of her autobiography, A Song Flung Up to Heaven, in 2002. The book covers 4 years from the time Angelo returned from Ghana in 1964 through the moment when she sat down in her mother's table and began to write I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings in 1968. Angelo hesitated so long to start the book and took so long to finish it because so many painful things happened to her and to the entire African American community in those 4 years. I didn't know how to write it, she said. I didn't see how the assassination of Malcolm X, the Watts riot, the breakup of a love affair, then the assassination of Martin Luther King, how I could get all that loose with something uplifting in it. A song flung up to heaven deals forthrightly with these events, and the poignant beauty of Angel's writing enhances rather than masks the candor with which she addresses the racial crisis through which America was passing. Angelo was also a prolific and widely read poet, and her poetry has often been lauded more for its depictions of black beauty, the strength of women, and the human spirit, criticizing the Vietnam War, demanding social justice for all, than for its poetic virtue. Yet Just Give Me a Cool Drink of Water 'Fore I Die, which was published in 1971, was nominated for a Pulitzer Award in 1972. As Angelo wrote her autobiographies and poems, she continued her career in film and television. She was the first black woman to have a screenplay produced in 1972. She was honored with a nomination for an Emmy Award for her performance in Roots in 1977. In 1979, Angelo helped adapt her book I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings for a television movie of the same name. She wrote the poetry for the 1993 film Poetic Justice and played the role of Aunt Jane. One source of Angelo's fame in the early 1990s was President Bill Clinton's invitation to write and read an inaugural poem. Americans all across the country watched as she read on the pulse of morning, which begins a rock, a river, a tree, and calls for peace, racial and religious harmony, and social justice for people of different origins, incomes, genders, and sexual orientations. It recalls the civil rights movement and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous I Have a Dream speech as it urges America to give birth again to the dream of equality. During the early 1990s, Angelo wrote several books for children, including Life Does Not Frighten Me in 1993, My Painted Cows, My Friendly Chicken, and Me in 1994, and Coffee and His Magic in 1996. Angelo also wrote occasional poems, including A Brave Startling Truth in 1995, which commemorated the founding of the United Nations, and Amazing Peace in 2005, a poem written for the White House Christmas tree lighting ceremony. Angelo's poetry often benefited from her performance of it, and during her lifetime, she recited her poems before spellbound crowds. Indeed, Angelo's poetry can also be traced to African American oral traditions like slave and work songs, especially in her use of personal narrative and emphasis on individual responses to hardship, oppression, and loss. In addition to examining individual experiences, Angelo's poems often respond to matters like race and sex on a larger social and psychological scale. In 2013, she was the recipient of the Literarian Award, an honorary National Book Award for contributions to the literary community. She died in 2014 at the age of 86. I love Maya Angelou. Thank you.